Welcome everybody to this Organiser podcast on Goa Liberation Day. Today we have with us Shefali Vaidya. Among the many other facets to her personality, we know that she is a public intellectual, she is an author, she is a social influencer, and most importantly, she is a very strong voice when it comes to Sanatan Hindu issues. So welcome Shefali.
Thank you.
Shall we talk about you have your origins in Goa, your family is from Goa, and you have also the good fortune of being the daughter of one of the very renowned and acclaimed fighters of the Azad Gomantak Dal, who was instrumental in liberating Goa.
Yes.
And I think better than me speaking, it's best that we begin with you. Can you share any memories that you have that your dad shared with you?
Okay. Thank you so much, Kirti. First of all, to take up a topic like this, which is Goa Liberation Movement, and not many people outside Goa know what all went into the history of Goa. To take a topic like this and do a podcast for this itself is a very good thing that you're doing, and I thank you and Organiser for taking up this subject. See, not many people know, not many people outside Goa know that Goa was the first part of Bharat that was colonized by a European power way before the British came to India. So Goa was taken over by the Portuguese, parts of Goa actually, to be really factual, in 1510 by the Portuguese. And then they were in power in Goa almost continuously till 1961. So that's 452 years of colonization, which is almost double in terms of time than the time that British occupied Bharat, So 452 years of colonization leaves behind its imprints. And the Portuguese as a colonial power were actually far more tyrannical. They were far more brutal in terms of physically torturing the local people of Goa. And I have often done talks about Goan history. I have often done talks about the Goa Inquisition and how it was instrumental in basically terrorizing the local populace. So the Portuguese destroyed the temples in Goa. That is why you see so many Hindu temples now located in a small area around Ponda, because that was at that point of time not under Portuguese rule. They forced the people who got converted, even they were practicing Hinduism secretly. So then they were forced to be the victims of Inquisition. I have talked about Inquisition in my other podcast, so I'm not going to go into detail here. But even Portuguese historians have admitted that the Goan Inquisition was the most brutal Inquisition movement anywhere in the history of the world. The kind of tortures that Goan people were subjected to, and this included Hindus, Muslims, Jewish people, as well as people who had converted to Christianity. It has been well documented. There is a book by A.K. Priolkar, who happens to be related to me, about Goa Inquisition, in which he has written in detail about what actually happened during the Inquisition. And I have done an extensive talk about it for Sangam Talks. Anybody who is interested in that can definitely check that out. But today is not the topic, that is the topic. But having said that, for 452 years, Goa was under an extremely brutal, tyrannical white European power, and they did everything in their power to basically destroy the sense of self of Goan people. Not only did they force their religion on them, they forced their language, they forced their attire, they forced their cuisine, they forced a whole new way of life on the people of Goa. And a lot of people fell into this trap, and they got converted to Christianity forcibly under extreme duress. And a lot of people,
and that included Muslims, Jews, Hindus.
Yes.
So they were targeting.
Jews were persecuted because they were Jews. They were in Goa to do trade and whatever. Muslim was persecuted because when the Portuguese took over the city of Old Goa, it was ruled by a Muslim garrison, which was under Adil Khan. So all the men were basically killed, and the women were forcibly married off to the Portuguese soldiers so that they should produce a progeny that would look Indian but would be Portuguese in their thought. That was a big thing for the Portuguese colonial masters. And the people who chose to remain in with their dharma, they were forced to, they were told basically that you either get converted or you move out or you will be killed. So a lot of people like my ancestors who used to live in a village called Verna Nagoa, those were twin villages, which had this amazing, beautiful temple of Mahalsa Narayani. When the temple was destroyed, they moved out, and there is no record of some 75, 80 years where they were. They probably were all over the place looking for refuge. Then they somehow ended up in my current village of Kunkulim, which at that point of time was a Kshatriya village, and therefore had a tradition of valor. And it was one of the villages that was one of the earliest to rise in rebellion against the brutal policies of the Portuguese. So from 1550 onwards till 1583, the people of Kunkulim consistently opposed the Portuguese.
Kunkulim is in your ancient name?
Kunkalli, Kunkulim, whatever you call it.
So they changed the names of the places as well.
Yes, they anglicized the name. So the names written even today in Marathi and Konkani are Kunkalli and Kukale. And in Portuguese, it's called, Portuguese or anglicized nomenclature, it's called Kunkulim. Like that, Sakhali becomes Sankelim, Bicholi becomes Bicholim. But that is another topic. Let's not get diverted about that. So my family, which was uprooted from our original ancestral village of Verna Nagoa, they shifted to Kunkulim, say around the middle of 16th century. And since then, we have been residents of the village of Kunkulim, Kunkalli, whatever. And that village, my village, was one of the first villages to rise in rebellion, armed rebellion against the Portuguese. Almost from 1550 to 1583, when the big revolt of Kunkulim happened, they were fighting the Portuguese in multiple ways. They first started off by the so-called non-violent ways, by refusing to pay taxes, refusing to let the revenue collectors pass through, because they knew that the Portuguese had already destroyed temples in Bardes and in Old Goa. So they wanted to protect the temples, they wanted to protect the Dharma. As they began to oppose, the Portuguese repressed them even more and more, and they used to come, destroy the houses, set fire to the homes, kill the people. The people used to simply move into the forest nearby, regroup, and again fight. So from 1550 to 1583, almost that's like 30 years, the people of Kunkulim continued to fight against the Portuguese. And the final thing was the Great Battle of Kunkulim, where some Portuguese missionaries and Portuguese soldiers were killed. And even today, there is a martyrs memorial in my village, where the chieftains who fought the Portuguese, their names are inscribed on that. And that is a history that we all grew up listening, even my generation, even the generation after that.
The British had not yet come into India then.
No, so that's what I'm saying. The Portuguese have a history of 452 years. So they came in 1510 and they left in 1961.
Way after our independence.
Years, yeah.
India got free in 1947, but Goa was still held by the Portuguese till 1961.
And that, again, I will discuss it later. So after that, the Portuguese came down very brutally against the people of Kunkulim. They called the chieftains for peace talks in Asolna fort. They told them that they will get free passage, that their temples would not be harmed. They're just calling them for talks. They called them to Asolna fort. They closed the doors of the fort, and you can imagine what happened. God. They massacred every single chieftain, and only one escaped. He jumped into the river and went to Karwar. But because of this one move, the entire movement was left leaderless, because they had killed everybody, all the clan leaders. So after that, and coupled with the absolute repression, they seized the lands of the people of Kunkulim. So because of that, the movement dissipated.
How sad. Goa is a part of India. It's a part of the big extended Bharat culture, Bharatiya culture. And none of us know anything about all this.
Yes, that is the tragic part. No, that is why I am so glad that you've chosen to take up this topic, because the history of oppression in Goa, it will make your blood curdle. The kind of terror that the Portuguese invoked upon the people of Goa, destroying their temples, destroying their dharma, torturing them, killing women, children, everybody. So it's a really dark chapter in the history of not just Goa, it's a dark chapter in the history of the world. But again, that is not the topic of today. Let's move on to the next question. So when I talk about this, a lot of people ask me, okay, you say that the Portuguese came to Goa in 1510 and they remained there till 1961. So what did the people of Goa do? Did they not fight them? Did they not resist? Were there no movements of resistance or revolts? There were moments of resistance and revolt, 14 revolts, documented ones, including the Pinto revolt, including the revolt of the Ranes, including the revolt of Punkulim, including the revolt of Maye under the Portuguese at sporadic periods in time. But all of them were crushed very brutally. And the reason that they couldn't succeed was they were isolated. If all these efforts would have happened at one time, then the Portuguese wouldn't have had any leg to stand in Goa. But that did not happen, and they were very brutal in crushing them. Just like what they did in Kunkulim, they killed the entire leadership at one go. They did the same thing with every revolt, and after that, people kind of, there were revolt, they subsided. After some time, there were revolt, they subsided. But there was a resistance movement. That was the violent resistance movement. Then there was a peaceful resistance movement. The temples that were the murtis that were shifted to the new localities in Ponda, those temples were in worship. So even people living in Portuguese territories, they made those arduous pilgrimages to those temples and they continued to worship. Even though their Hindu worship was banned in Portuguese territories, cremations were banned, Hindu
At least the
weddings
British
were
didn't do
banned.
that.
At least the British didn't do that. See, the British exploited India economically. They exploited India socially. They exploited India in the sense that they enslaved our minds. They colonized us. But they were not like brutally destroying temples or torturing people, building houses of torture and actively torturing people.
I recall somebody telling me that even a puja invite could not be sent without the censoring of
That's
the
what I said.
Portuguese
No, marriages
authorities.
were not allowed. Pujas were not allowed. There were no Hindu ceremonies that could be held in Portuguese territories. Even cremations. People used to put their dead on rafts and set the rafts on fire and set it sail in the rivers. What can be worse
No
than
cremation ground allowed.
No cremations allowed. Forget cremation ground. On the areas controlled by the Portuguese, you could not cremate a dead Hindu person.
Were there no efforts from the Vijayanagar Empire, Marathas, all these to liberate these people?
There were multiple efforts, but by the time Marathas did, but again, you're diverting. If
No,
we're
no, I
talking
just
about
wanted
the whole Goan history, that is a huge chapter. We cannot do it in 1 hour.
True.
Shivaji Maharaj led campaigns, Sambhaji Maharaj led campaigns, after that the Peshwas led campaigns, and after the Peshwas took over Vasai, the Dharmachal in Goa, it got curbed to a great extent because they knew that the Marathas could win against them.
Yeah, Chimaji Appa brought some Portuguese bells also. One of them is installed in Nashik.
He brought in multiple bells from the church in Vasai, and they are there in many temples in Maharashtra all over the place. So there were efforts, but coming to the
19th
topic.
century.
So from 1510 to say 1850s or so, there were these sporadic efforts, there were these multiple revolts. And after that, things kind of cooled down. Then there comes a second phase, which is today recognized as the Goa Liberation Movement, which starts in 1946. So in 1930, there is this guy called Salazar, who was a dictator, who takes over Portugal. He's a brutal military dictator. So the one thing he does is he suspends civil liberties, not just in Portugal, mainland Portugal. He suspends civil liberties in Goa, which means that people cannot meet in public, they cannot talk, they cannot publish, they cannot do any sort of opposition to Portuguese policies. They don't have the right to voice their opinions. They don't have the right to be educated in their own language. They're forced to study in Portuguese language. So basically, there was zero civil liberty. This was the time when Goa was reeling against poverty. Goa was fighting against economic exploitation because the Portuguese never let any industries come into Goa. So Goans were dependent on agriculture, which was rice, and most of the tribals living in villages and the mountains of Goa, their staple food was actually nachani and the ambil from nachani, because they couldn't even afford rice. Milk was not available, vegetables were not available. So it was a very poor quality of life that the Goans were experiencing across all economic strata. So anybody who got educated in Goa beyond a certain point had to leave Goa for higher education. So people went to Belgaum, they studied in Belgaum. They went to Mumbai, they studied in Mumbai. And there were no career opportunities in Goa. So they all had to take up jobs outside Goa. And when the Goa Liberation Movement happened from 1946 onwards, that was the time when this Goan diaspora, which was settled outside Goa, they supported this movement greatly. So to come to 1946. So 1946, 18th June of 1946 is a very important date in the history of Goa. That is why it is known as the Goa Kranti Din, the day the modern phase of Goa liberation movement was formally launched. So Ram Manohar Lohia, who was a great socialist nationalist leader, he had come to Asalna, a village incidentally which is very close to my ancestral village, for rest. And he was staying in the house of his friend Julian Menezes. And at that point of time, Mr. Menezes told him, and there is a huge tradition of Christian nationalists in Goa, okay, starting with T.B. Kunna, who is known as the father of Goan nationalism, Menezes Braganza, and a lot of other people who understood that the Portuguese had enslaved them. They were Christians by religion, yes, because by that time conversion had already happened, but they were not blind to what the Portuguese had done. So they may have been Christians by religion, but they were nationalists by heart, and they knew that they were children of Bharat and they wanted to be united with Bharat itself, starting with T.B. Kunna.
Yeah. World War II was over. 46.
Yes.
India was yet to become independent.
Yes, India was like on the cusp of being free. So when Julian Menezes told Ram Manohar Lohia that Goans are seething internally, but they do not have direction. They don't have a single civil liberty, so they want to be able to, speak freely, voice their dissent freely. So Ram Manohar Lohia said that let's organize a public meeting. So they organized a public meeting in a ground in Madgaon, which is today known as Lohia Maidan, in memory of this movement. And when they went, this was basically just spread by word of mouth. But a lot of Goans, more than 300, 400 Goans came to hear Ram Manohar Lohia that day, even though the Portuguese had banned, as I said, there were no civil liberties, right? So people couldn't gather for a public meeting, but still they defied the ban and they came to listen to Ram Manohar Lohia. And even as Ram Manohar Lohia was about to speak, some Goans came to meet him with a garland. And that time there was a Portuguese captain who was supervising this. So he raised his gun and he pointed at those people. So Lohia, being the fearless leader that he was, he actually held his hand and said, you cannot do that. And then he went on to address the gathering. After that, he was arrested. Along with him, some other people were arrested. One of them was my grandfather, by the way, Trivikram Vaidya. There were others also. Mr. Julian Menezes were also arrested. My grandfather's fault was that my grandfather had a career business at that point of time, and he had brought Ram Manohar Lohia, Julian Menezes, and all those people from Asalna to Madgaon at the center. So he was also arrested.
Brought them
some 7-8 people. Huh?
How did he brought them?
In his career, he ran a Carrera business. So he drove public transport bus sort of thing.
Okay.
So then when everybody on the stage was arrested, my grandfather was also arrested, and then they were left out they were let out in a couple of days, and then Ram Manohar Lohia was told that you have to leave Goa, and he was escorted out of Goa to the Indian border. But this one meeting on 18th June set in motion,
ignited
a whole movement, because Goans were feeling this, that India is, and everybody was aware, right? They knew that India was going to be free soon. It was 1946, that freedom was imminent. And they thought that when India became free from the British yoke, Goa would also be naturally free from the Portuguese yoke. And Goa is such a small thing that once the free Indian government comes in power in Delhi, within 2 days, Goa would also become free and be a part of India.
Correct.
And that the fight of the Goa liberation movement actually had twofold goals. One goal was to be free of the Portuguese yoke. The second goal, equally important, was Goa did not want to be an independent nation. It wanted to be a part of India because it always viewed itself as a part of India culturally, socially, religiously, in every which way. So these were the twofold goals. And that is how from 1946, there were multiple movements for Goa liberation that were set in motion. One was a satyagraha non-violent movement, which was primarily led by National Congress of Goa, which eventually merged into the Indian National Congress. The second one was the Goan People's Party, which believed in both non-violent as well as violent struggle. The third one was the Azad Gomantak Dal, which basically believed that a repressive, tyrannical regime like Portuguese regime, could only be defeated not by non-violent means, but only by violent revolutionary struggle.
Yeah, you're talking about the Azad Gomantak Dal.
Yes.
And your father was a big part of it. How did he come to join Azad Gomantak Dal? He must have been a very young boy then.
Yes. So before that, let's understand a little bit about the history of Azad Gomantak Dal, which is very interesting. So when this meeting, the 18th June 1946 meeting happened in Loya Maidan in Madgaon, one of the people attending these meetings was Mr. Vishwanath Lawande. He was at that point of time a person who wanted to join the National Congress of Goa, and he did join the National Congress of Goa. And after that, he was a part of National Congress of Goa. But he realized pretty quickly that while the National Congress of Goa had chosen non-violent means, satyagraha, as a means of protest against the Portuguese, he participated also in some of the satyagrahas. My grandfather's brother also participated. His name was Venkatesh Vishnu Vaidya. He was actually jailed in Agwad, in Resh Magush Fort, I think, and he was there for some 4 months or something in jail, and then he was released. And then, but that's besides the point. I'm just telling you that I have 3 generations of people who are very closely associated with the Goa liberation movement.
Yeah, but that is important also, because like you're saying, he was a non-violent participant. And what did the Goan government and the Portuguese government do with him? Just dumped him into jail, and that was it. No talks, nothing.
Nothing. So anyway, Mr. Lawande realized pretty soon that non-violent is not the way. It may work with the British, because the British still had a democratic system in place in their own country. Portugal was at that point of time under a very brutal dictatorship under Salazar, and they were using brutal power to suppress their own people in mainland Portugal. So why would they be kind towards the Goans? So they realized that the only way to fight the Portuguese and to make a difference is to indulge in violent struggle, armed resistance. So then he got some, and he was like the hot-blooded young man, Vishwanath Lawande, at that point of time. So he got some like-minded people to come together, and they met next year actually. 18th June 1946 was the day Lohia galvanized this whole thing. On 18th June 1947, just before Indian independence, some young soldiers as in soldiers mentally, they got together in a temple of Shantadurga in Bhom.
How dramatic.
And they passed around a pistol, and they took oaths to form a group that would dedicate itself to the Goa liberation movement, and they would use only armed struggle as a means, because Portuguese are not the kind benevolent colonial powers, who will give you a democratic trial or anything like that.
Yeah, but that would be romancing death also, no?
Pardon me?
That would be romancing death.
Of course it was romancing death. When you choose revolutionary struggle as your path, you are basically romancing death. Bhagat Singh did it, Rajguru did it, Sukhdev did it, Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose did it, Swatantra Savarkar did it. Any revolutionary who chooses an armed struggle as the path to liberate the motherland has to understand that this path could lead him to death, but they were prepared for it. So the oath itself is very interesting. The oath had like multiple aspects to it. It said that I am consciously dedicating myself to the cause of liberating my motherland, Goa, and making it a part of India. That was very clearly mentioned, that I choose armed revolution as a path. That was clearly mentioned. And I understand the risks involved in it, clearly mentioned. If I am found doing anything, indulging in any activity that is against the interest of Goa and against the interest of Goa liberation movement, then I should get the punishment that I deserve. All of this was mentioned in the oath. So they passed around a pistol, and I am stressing this because the oath was taken on a pistol that very clearly said that this is the way they have chosen. The oath was taken in a Shantadurga temple. This is very reminiscent of Shivaji Maharaj taking the oath. This is very reminiscent also of Savarkar taking the oath, saying that Swatantra Sati Marito Mare. So they are continuing the same tradition. Okay. So after that, they started their armed struggle in right earnest. One of their first attacks was against the Banco Nacional in Mapusa. That was the Portuguese bank. And trying to, because, you take a oath, you gather a ragtag band of fighters who are dedicated. But where are you going to be trained? You know
You
that
need
you've chosen
money, you
arms
need
struggle,
arms.
but arms कैसे चलाने उसका भी तो education होना चाहिए. You need to have the arms in first place. You need to have the armaments in first place. You need to have that expertise in the first place. How do you do that? You need money for it. So one of the first attacks that they did was they tried to attack the bank, and they wanted to get that money which would be used for training camps and which would be used for procuring arms and armaments. Unfortunately, there was a leak in the plans, and that plan was foiled. And almost all the founder members of Azad Gomantak Dal, including Sinari, including Dattatreya Deshpande, they were all arrested. And except for Vishwanath Lawande, who somehow managed arrest at that point of time. I'm talking about this happened in 1949, if I remember correctly.
Okay, so
Just
India was
after
already free.
India
but
was
these
already
people
free.
were fighting in isolation.
Yes.
Without assistance.
Yes. But Sinari luckily escaped.
Prabhakar Sinari.
Prabhakar Sinari luckily escaped. And then he rejoined Lawande again. And then they realized that, and the Portuguese had brutally tortured the people who were arrested. The Dattatreya Deshpande was jailed, and everybody who was arrested, they had something called a kavalmari, which was a stick which was made from hippo hide from Africa, and it had serrated edges. And they used that to beat up the people they arrested. And the edges were so sharp.
Oh, you remind me. They also put them confined in some spaces in the fort.
Yes.
Where it was like a few 2-3 feet by 4-5 feet, that kind of rooms with no air, no ventilation, no light. Torture.
And just one stroke of that kavalmari would make you lose the skin completely on your body. And after that, they would put salt and really torture the people. It was really inhuman torture. So that was like the first time that the Azad Gomantak Dal was seeing any taste of action, and also the aftermath of that action. They realized that how brutal the Portuguese can be. That made their resolve even stronger, and they gathered together, and they would then started actively recruiting soldiers for Azad Gomantak Dal. Now that process had to be very strict. They had to be very sure that the people who want to contribute are ideologically very sound. They understand that this is a tough path. They should not break down at the first sign of adversity. If they were arrested and if they were tortured, they shouldn't be able to tell all the secrets.
Yeah, and imperil other members.
Yes. So all of that, they had some process in place. Everybody who was interested had to undergo an interview, undergo a screening process. They had to pay 50 paise at that point of time to become a member of AGT. And after that, they would be trained. So who did this training? This is also very interesting. There was a captain called Captain Gole, and there was a colonel, Sherjan Chaudhary, from the Indian Army, who volunteered to train these people. So they established training camps in the borders of Goa.
Secretly, I'm sure, because
secretly, obviously secretly.
Indian government did not want to have anything to do.
Again, that will come later. So initially, they thought that they will establish these training camps where they would get these people, they would get some armaments somehow, and there Captain Gole and Colonel Chaudhary helped out a lot, and they would train these young boys into marksmanship, into explosives, into using guns and ammunitions.
In Indian territory or in Goa?
In Indian territory, because they couldn't do it legally in Goa. So they had to do it on the border. They had to do it in secret, because as you said, the Indian government had stated that while they are ideologically aware of the Goa liberation movement and they understand that Goa wants to be the part of India, but Nehru was so enamored with his image as a national peacemaker, international peacemaker, that he did not want to, not only he did not want to support the armed movement, he tried everything in his power to ensure that they do not get arms, they do not get supplies, that their camps would also frequently be raided, their radio stations would be secretly raided, and this is all documented.
He dreaded the NATO. He said Portugal is a NATO power.
Yes.
So, I also heard J.D. Nagarwala, the police officer, also aided these people secretly.
Yes. That is partly yes. But lot of people aided these people secretly. But what I'm trying to tell you, that officially the government of India under Prime Minister Nehru did everything in their power to ensure that this movement would be crushed.
Scuttle it.
So that is, they made sure they do not get arms. They confiscated their arms. When they were getting those arms from the borders, from both Karnataka borders and Maharashtra borders, they were raided by the Indian police, and their their hands were basically tied behind their back. But still, the Azad Gomantak Dal continued to fight even in these dire circumstances. Now, they did so many multiple things, and I'm going to talk a little bit in detail about what all the Azad Gomantak Dal did, because hardly anybody knows about the contributions of the Azad Gomantak Dal, and everything that I'm saying here is documented. I have personally heard people, because I followed my father wherever I went in those days, and I have had close interactions with people like Vishwanath Lawande, with Narayan Naik, with Nagesh Karmali. All of them are not there anymore, but they were all actual participants, and some of them were founding members of the Azad Gomantak Dal. And the kind of things that they did with such a severe resource crunch was really amazing. One thing they did was they did the survey, geographical survey of the mountains. They obviously couldn't come by road, right? All their operations that were planned, all the attacks on the armories, all the attacks on the police stations, all the assassination attempts that they did, they obviously couldn't just take a bus or a car and come by the main road and walk in. They had to walk from the borders. They had to walk through the jungles. So to do that, they needed to find out which were the villages around the forest. They needed to develop contacts with the villages so that the villagers would give them at least food when they are stuck, which are the safe houses, which are the best places to cross over, which are safe from wild animals. We are talking about a very dense Western Ghat forest there, which is even today, it is not easy to walk and cross the Western Ghats on the Goa-Karnataka border or Goa-Maharashtra border even today in 2025. Yes. And I'm talking about pre-1967. So they did a comprehensive survey of how to get into Goa from Maharashtra as well as from Karnataka. People actually walked, they marked the time taken from village to village, from camp to camp, which would be the best way to cross. Where are the water sources? Because obviously you couldn't carry so much of water. Where can you get food? What kind of food can you get? How can you get, convince the locals that they are fighting for a good cause? So this they did. Then they also wanted to educate the rest of India about Azad Gomantak Dal, about the activities that were being carried out by the Azad Gomantak Dal. So they started a magazine called Navjeevan, which would basically talk about the need for the armed struggle, which would give parallel examples like the Israeli underground movement called the Irgun. So there were articles about that. They started a Marathi magazine called Jwala, which would also talk about that. They ran a radio station from a place called Ramghat, which was called Azad Gomantak Radio, which would, telecast. And you remember, the official Portuguese India radio was very biased pro-Portuguese, and that would give only the pro-government information or news. So they needed a radio station which would give correct news.
Where would this be broadcast, to the people or to the fighters alone? To the
people, to the general people. This was to inform the people. This was basically the publicity material that the Azad Gomantak Dal was doing. They ran two Marathi publications called Jwala and Kranti. They ran a radio station called Azad Gomantak Radio. They performed a play called Zalta Gomantak in Mumbai, in multiple places, to inform the general public of Bharat about what is going on in Goa and why are the Goans fighting against it, why is the Azad Gomantak Dal fighting against it. They wrote several articles in a magazine called Navjeevan, which some copies you will find it in the Azad Gomantak Dal Museum in Goa today, in Purvari, even now. In all these activities, they tried to get the people of India together and make them understand that here is an organization that is going to fight the Portuguese in Goa. They have chosen the armed way, and this is the reason why they are fighting. Now, the name. Why did they choose the name Azad Gomantak Dal? That's also a very interesting process. So they were wondering what name to put. When they took the oath in Bom in the Shantadurga temple, at that point of time, they did not have a name in mind. They called themselves Valmiki, on Rishi Valmiki, because he also came from the subaltern movement and then he wrote the Ramayana. So like that, he was hidden. The story is he was hidden in an anthill, right, till he attained Siddhi. And then when he came outside that, he was a fully realized man, and after that he wrote the Ramayana. So they called themselves Valmiki. When it was time to change their name and when they decided that they needed a greater identity, they called themselves Azad Gomantak Dal because all of the founder members were very, very influenced by Azad Hind Fauj of Subhash Chandra Bose. They were in awe of Subhash Chandra Bose and they wanted to organize a similar army, which would not be an official army, obviously, but it would be structured like an army. It would have the same chain of command and it would have the same absolute loyalty of the soldiers. So they decided to call it Azad Gomantak. First, they wanted to call it Azad Gomantak Fauj. Then they realized that they are not a Fauj. They are not an army. So they have to have something smaller. So then they decided to call it Azad Gomantak Dal, and that's how the name came into being. Now, Azad Gomantak Dal was officially formed as an organization. It was not a ragtag bunch of 5 people just coming together and deciding we are going to fight. They had a constitution. In their constitution, their goals were very clearly outlined, and the goals were twofold, as I said. One is to free Goa from the Portuguese yoke. 2, make sure that Goa becomes one with mainland mother Bharat. And these were the 2 stated goals. But they were also had a vision of the ideal Goan society after this goal was achieved. Every Goan would have the civil liberties that were denied to them. Every Goan would have right to education. Women would have the right to go to school and to get educated and to work. The children would have the right to education. People would get economically, there would not be any caste discrimination. Everybody would have the right to self-determination. So all of these things are actually enshrined in their constitutions. All of this very progressive, very well stated constitution.
Yes.
Then we come to the second phase. So after this happened, 1946, Loya made a statement. From 1946 to say 1954, when the Dadra and Nagar Haveli liberation movement happened, that is when all of these things were taking place. Sporadic attacks, there were Goans organizing themselves into different ways. Some were organizing in a non-violent protest way. Some were organizing in armed struggle. Their training was parallelly going on. So in 1954, when the Dadra Nagar Haveli liberation happened, these were 2 enclaves near Daman, which were under the Portuguese. So there were parallel forces who was everybody in Goa liberation movement was at that point of time, they realized that if they liberate Dadra and Nagar Haveli, it would be a shock for the Portuguese government and they would realize that their rule in Goa is not invincible. Now remember, the Portuguese had always made Goa as Estado de India. They had never said that it's a colony. They had always said that Goa is a part of Portugal. It's an integral part of Portugal, and that is why they have every moral right to rule Goa. It was not just a colonial power that is establishing a colony. There's an important distinction. Britain always treated India like a colony. Portugal never treated Goa like a colony. They treated it like a state of Portugal in namesake. Did they treat the people of Goa like that? No. There was always very clear racial discrimination, but officially they said this is Estado de India, Portugal. This is the Indian state of Portugal, and Portugal has every God-given moral, social, economic, political right to rule this colony. So between 46 to 54, different people were organizing themselves to fight against the Portuguese in different ways. Some were organizing, and I'm not discounting their contribution. They also contributed. There were satyagrahas at Patradevi, which were fired upon by the Portuguese. Some 22 people died in that. And in those satyagrahas, people from all over India participated, not just from Goa. And interestingly, during when these satyagrahas were organized, now that we are talking about the subject, Nehru actually said that no non-Goan should participate in this. So he legally banned non-Goans from coming to the border of Goa and participating in the Portugal.
Goa liberation.
But people defied that ban, and there were people among those killed. There were people from Punjab who were killed, people from Bengal who were killed, people from Maharashtra, yes, they were there in large numbers. So people from all over India participated in those satyagrahas, and they paid the price also. They were tortured, some were killed, there was indiscriminate firing. So there were legitimate path. The non-violent path was equally legitimate, but the violent path was what that really shook the Portuguese. So in Dadra Nagar Haveli, Silvassa was liberated by a joint military operation by the Azad Gomantak Dal and the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh. In that campaign, people like Sudhir Phadke had participated. Babasaheb Purandare was trying to organize public opinion in Pune about this. They had organized a concert by Lata Mangeshkar to raise funds for the Goa liberation movement. So the contribution of RSS in the liberation of Dadra and Nagar Haveli is quite immense, and it has been well documented also.
Your father was also a part of the Nagar Haveli.
Yes. So that is when my father got involved. My father was still that point of time. Of course, we had a tradition of political awareness in our family. As I said, my grandfather was one of the first people to be arrested after Loya on that day. My grandfather's brother had done a satyagraha and he had been jailed. My father, from his school days, was involved in distributing pamphlets, helping the freedom fighters in their satyagrahas, writing anti-Portuguese slogans, even as a school child. But after that, economically, we were not that successful at that point of time. So he was actually studying in Vaidya College in Pune at that point of time. And that is when he had read about that Azad Gomantak Dal is planning to launch a movement to liberate Dadra and Nagar Haveli.
Yeah, so, Dadra and Nagar Haveli are landlocked areas which were not actually attached to the proper Goa.
Yes, they are far away. They are close to Daman. So they are closer to today's Gujarat.
Goa, the Goan Portuguese government at that time would have needed permission from India to travel across those landlocked areas into Nagar Haveli.
Not really. They didn't need a permission. They needed permission from the Portuguese government, but which they were now not going to do it. They were going to launch a military operation, so nobody needs permissions for the military operation.
Nagar Haveli had a police garrison, but not an army.
Yes. Having said that, Morarji Desai, who was at that point of time ruling the Bombay presidency, he did not want an armed revolution to liberate Dadra and Nagar Haveli. So he tried everything in his power to stop these people from gathering towards Dadra and Nagar Haveli. Anyway, to come back to the story, my father was at that point of time studying in Vaidya College in Pune actually, and he read about this movement, and he knew Vishwanath Lawande.
He was a footballer also.
He was a footballer also. He was a very good sports person. He was about to play a very important match the next day. So he had this ideological kashmakash. He had this thing that, what do I do? Do I stay here and play the game? And because if he left, then the team would fall apart. Or he would answer the call of his conscience and join the liberation movement. And then he read about Sinari. Sinari was 1 year younger than my father. And he felt that, oh, this boy who is 1 year younger to me, he's been arrested and he has managed to escape and he has rejoined the Goa liberation movement. What am I going to do? Why am I only thinking about my own education, my own family's betterment? I should also, Goa is my motherland, I should be a part of it and I should be a participant of it. So he just took a call in the middle of the night, didn't inform anybody. He had friends who were actually my mother's brothers. At that point of time, my father was not married, but they were friends. So he did not tell anybody. They were also studying. In fact, they had come to Vaidya College because my father had taken admission there. He just, in the middle of the night, he took a train from Pune to Mumbai. And from Mumbai, he took another train. In that train compartment, he met the RSS Tukdi. And when they realized that he was also, when he was also going to join the liberation movement of Dadra Nagar Haveli, they welcomed him. And that is how he got involved in the liberation of the Dadra Nagar Haveli thing. And when Silvassa was liberated, my father was one of the key figures in that movement. And that is how he got involved in Azad Gomantak Dal.
This Nagar Haveli thing I also wanted to mention is that your father must have really taken a brave call, because not enough weapons were in hand, and they were about to go and take a garrison of 200 policemen or something. So this bunch of ragtag fighters, hardly a few had any weapon of any sort.
When my father landed there, Vishwanath Lawande himself gave him a revolver and said that from now on you are going to use this. And remember, my father didn't need to be trained. A lot of these people who joined Azad Gomantak Dal had to be trained in arms and ammunition. My father was already an expert marksman. My grandfather had guns at home. My grandfather was a very renowned hunter in those days when hunting was not disallowed. And he was a very good marksman, my grandfather, and my grandfather taught my father. So my father already, when he was in college, he knew how to shoot from both hands, and he was an equally good marksman. So he did not have this whole learning curve where somebody has to teach him what a revolver is, how you open it, how you load it, and how you fire it. He already knew that, so that really helped. So that was his first brush with the Goa liberation movement, and he actually injured a Portuguese soldier in that liberation movement, and he realized for the first time what it is like. It's not easy for a person to, when you see somebody's blood, I think we just read about it in books and we think it's very glamorous or whatever, but it's not that easy to see somebody else bleed because of your actions. If you're a normal human being, if you have normal conscience, and if you have a certain way of looking at things, that first thing, even though you know that you have to do it, even though you know you have the moral sanction to do it, but even then when you actually do something like that, it weighs on your conscience. Completely. It's a battle that you have. So my father has written extensively about that battle of conscience in his book Dadra Nagar Havelicha Mukti Sangram and Me. Anyway, fast forward to the story. So Nagar Haveli was liberated in 1954. 1955, 15th August, T.B. Kunna was called to raise the national flag there and to officially declare that Dadra and Nagar Haveli is now a part of Bharat. And that was a first jolt, really big jolt to the Portuguese regime, because they realized if this can happen to Dadra and Nagar Haveli, it can happen to Goa also. So they stepped up their military presence. They got soldiers in from Africa. That is why there are many folk songs in Goa about Pakle and Khapri, which they used to call in colloquial terms.
They were very abusive.
Africans, yes. So there were Pakles are the white Portuguese soldiers and the Khapris are the African soldiers. But they imported huge garrisons of African soldiers into Goa who were very brutal and who were told to be brutal actually. And there was a guy called Subchef Montero in Goa. Just as Salazar was very brutal in Portugal, this Subchef Montero was a terror. Everybody really spoke about him in hushed tones because he was a sadist who took perverse pleasure when he arrested some people, even on suspicion of being a part of Goa liberation movement, whether they are satyagrahis or non-satyagrahis, whatever, doesn't matter. He would take great pleasure in torturing them, So he was a much hated and much feared figure. Anyway, so that chapter, the Goa liberation, the Dadra Nagar Haveli chapter sort of ended in 1955. After that, the focus of Azad Gomantak Dal shifted in mainland Goa. So what the Azad Gomantak Dal did was they realized that by now they had a reasonable force, reasonable strength of members. So they could actually divide into 3 camps. There was a South Goa camp, there was a North Goa camp, there was a Central Goa camp. North Goa camp was headed by Prabhakar Sinari, South Goa camp was headed by my father, Prabhakar Trivikram Vaidya, and the Central Goa camp was headed by Narayan Naik, if I remember correctly. And it was their responsibility to organize armed resistance in their areas. Now, in what form did this armed resistance take place? One was to attack police stations and armories and raid their arms to use them against the Portuguese themselves. Second was they realized that mining was the mainstay of the Portuguese economy. So to destroy mining, and they had some sympathetic mine owners who would provide the explosives to Azad Gomantak Dal soldiers like Dayanand Bandodkar, who became later on the first chief minister of Goa. He owned mines and he ensured that these people would get access to because the mines were legally allowed by the Portuguese, dynamite and all that, because obviously they needed to do that for mining. So some of it was diverted to Azad Gomantak Dal. Azad Gomantak Dal had experts in explosives. My father was one of them. They destroyed railway bridges because most of the mineral traffic export out of Goa was through the trains. So
the port and then to Portugal.
Port to Portugal.
Siphoning.
Port to Portugal, but also to the mainland India, which was done by the trains. So Azad Gomantak Dal actually targeted the train routes. My father was the one who was responsible in blowing up a train bridge from Castle Rock on the Castle Rock Goa route. There were others also like Narayan Naik and all who led and
But this is so
destroyed.
scary. That means these people have no semblance of normal family life or a home to go back to. Because if
did
they are
not-
up to these
No.
activities, you think the Goan Portuguese government would have sat.
No, they were all underground. No, they hardly had any family life. Like my father would come home once in 6 months or 7 months in the middle of the night, and he would just be with his mother for half an hour, and then he had to leave because he couldn't come by road, and the houses were always
Yeah,
watched.
even
They
you,
knew who were the people.
long ago said that they survived on packets of biscuits and water.
Not even packets of biscuits. They
and
survived.
no bath.
My father is eating a crow.
God.
He has actually killed and fried a crow because that was the only thing that was available.
And you also told about your grandmother once, I remember.
Yeah.
How she would, in that little brief while that she got hold of her beloved son, try to give him some semblance of normal life, like a quick
she would
bath.
give him she would heat up water and she would make him have a bath because he hadn't taken a bath in how many days. And while he was
In the
taking
jungles.
a bath, before that she would give him oil massage. The oil massage was an excuse. She would basically just touch his body to ensure that he is not injured and there is no, and remember those days you did not have WhatsApp, you did not have phones, they did not even have access to Telegram, so there was no news. So if the man goes, he goes. You don't know whether your son is alive, dead, whether he is going to come back, whether you're going to see him again. There is no guarantee. And this was not just the case of my grandmother.
With the threat that somebody could knock on the door and come
anytime. My grandfather was taken into custody multiple times. Just on suspicion that Prabhakar Vaidya is, we heard that he is home. So our house could be raided anytime. My aunt's house, she used to live in a jungle and they did use her house as a safe house. Her house was raided multiple times on the suspicion that this guy might be taking refuge there. So everybody paid a price. When my father attacked the Kunkole Marmari, led the attack on Kunkole Marmari, there were other people like Shabu Desai, Dattaram Uttam Desai were involved in it. After that, they managed to escape. The raid was very successful. They got a Sten gun, they got a lot of ammunition, and they managed to escape on the same route that was taken by the ancient chieftains when they had attacked the Portuguese in 1583. But after that, they turned the entire town of Kunkulim as a garrison, the Portuguese. They raided 200 houses. They arrested people indiscriminately and tortured them, including people who had nothing to do with the attack. And the tortures were truly brutal, like, that Kavalmari torture, like dunking their faces into water till they couldn't breathe anymore, till they would be able to say that. So the Portuguese torture were like really, really brutal. Anyway, so this is not just the case of my father. It's a case of every revolutionary who fought for Azad Gomantak Dal. Once they were gone, they were gone. Their families would not know whether they are alive, they're dead, whether they're going to come back alive, in what state are they going to come back. They had no clue. But their children had made the choice, so they had to live with that choice. And many of these people who were the Azad Gomantak Dal soldiers were boys from very ordinary homes.
Yeah.
They were not like, aristocrats, or they did not have, tradition of fighting behind them. But all they had was a very strong love for Goa, very strong love for India. And that is why they chose to become soldiers of Azad Gomantak Dal. So Azad Gomantak Dal attacks, as I said, they would attack arms and armories and get the ammunition to fight the Portuguese. They were explosive experts, so they tried to derail the economic activity by destroying the railway lines. They organized assassination attempts. They tried to assassinate Montero 3 different times, at 3 different places. All 3 times, by his good luck, he escaped. They sent a book bomb to a judge called Judge Quadros. They basically sent him a book as a gift.
So like Veer Savarkar sent the gun to Kanel.
And they cut out the book pages and they filled it in explosives and they made the circuit so that when the judge opened the book, the bomb will explode. And it did explode. He lost his eye. His whole house was destroyed. He managed to survive after surgeries, but with a lot of disabilities. They invented something called a flag bomb, which is very interesting. So the Portuguese used to hate the Indian tricolor with a vengeance, right? So every time they saw an Indian tricolor, they would want to bring it down. Yeah, they would yank it down. So what these people realized, and my father was instrumental in this, he tried it first in Lolia and then they tried it in many places. So they would set up a circuit of explosives and they would hoist the Indian flag in the dead of the night and write Jai Hind slogans all around. So in the morning, obviously, the Portuguese guy, whoever is in charge there, would get to know, they would get really mad, and then they would come, and their first instinct was to bring the flag down. So the minute they tried to bring the flag down, the circuit would break and there would be an explosion. So they first tried it in Lolien, and there was a Portuguese, I forgot his name, Jose something, who got injured and then later on succumbed to his injury. And they did it in multiple places. So this was one thing they did. And meanwhile, all of the publicity thing was also happening parallelly. The economic activities, the actual attacks happened on multiple levels. And finally, when in 1961, when Operation Vijay happened, when India finally sent the army, and do you know why India sent the army? That is because there was an Afro-Asian conference in Bandung, where all the African colonies of Portugal, like Mozambique and Angola and whatever, their representatives were also there, and there were African nations also, and they were saying that we are looking at India. You are our leader. You have to take this action. This is ridiculous that India got free in 1947 and Goa still has to wait till 1961 for this. So there was a conference organized in Delhi in October 1961, where the members representative of all the organizations that were fighting for Goa liberation movement were called there. There were representatives from African nations as well, and they all made a combined petition to Nehru saying that it's high time. 14 years people of Goa have been suffering. Every time they think that India will come in and India will liberate them, and this happened in 1954, 1955. Every time the satyagrahis happened, all the villagers in the borders, they were ready with flowers and rangoli or whatever. They were so sure that Nehru would send in the Indian army and Goa would be liberated every single time. And there are documented anecdotes where they would be disappointed that there's no military action, and then they would say कि अब कुछ नहीं हो सकता, maybe देवाकत जाए Portugal गोचे rule करता. They're simple people, right?
What does that translate as?
It means that nothing is going to happen. Maybe God only wants Portugal to rule Goa. These are simple people, right? They were farmers, they were peasants, and they were like desperately waiting for India to take the action, and India was not taking the action because of multiple issues. So finally, in October, when the world, African countries, they all pressurized Nehru, Nehru finally took the call. And when Operation Vijay happened, actually Azad Gomantak Dal was the one which basically they coordinated very closely. And they were the ones who gave the signal to the army saying that, this is the best way, this is the best route, and this is how you came in. By that time, they had already, they had stepped up their activities. Like a day before Operation Vijay, my father had led an attack on the Bali military outpost, which is very close to my village of Kongolim. And these activities were happening parallelly all over. So the contribution of Azad Gomantak Dal to Goa liberation movement is immense. And there was a guy called Kedar Anvekar. Again, not too many people know this story, but this has to be told. He was a radio technologist, and he was given the task of assembling a bomb in a transistor radio, which would be gifted to a Portuguese political leader. And then when he tried to turn on the radio, it would basically blast off, and that was an assassination attempt. Unfortunately, when he was assembling it, the explosives went off, and he himself died, Kedar Anvekar. And the impact of that explosion was so much that they only found the parts of his torso. They couldn't even give him a proper,
cremation.
They gave whatever they found, they gave a cremation. But this is, but his martyrdom also, and it became big news, right? So the Portuguese also realized that these people have the capability of doing it. The Judge Cadros's assassination attempt, that book bomb also went off. Then there was another attempt against a Portuguese police officer that also became successful. So all this made the Portuguese government really terrified. So my father and his colleagues, they were tried 2 times in absentia, and both times they were sentenced to jail, almost like 28 years. So if my father was caught, then he would have been sent to Angola and probably killed there only. I would not be here. But fortunately, he was always underground. And this is not just the case of my father. Mr. Lawande paid a price. Mr. Narayan Naik paid a price. Nagesh Karmali paid a price. Sinari paid a price. Everybody, all of these boys, they were fighting every single day with a threat to their life. Nobody knew. Their families did not know. They were not married. They were all young people. Some of them probably were in love or whatever. My father definitely was, but even their love interest, they did not know whether they are going to come back alive or whether they are going to make a life together. It's a really remarkable story, and it hurts me that not too many people know about this. This is why I am going to talk. I mean, I am talking about this in such an extended
So
manner.
when 1961 Indian Army marched in, the land had already been tweaked and cultivated properly by the Azad Gomantak Dal.
Yes. And you know about the scorched earth policy of the Portuguese, right? So when they realized that they could not hold on any longer, the instructions from Portugal were very clear that
Don't
burn
surrender.
and destroy, don't surrender, burn and destroy everything, and leave the land as scorched as possible,
Yeah,
as
but the
destroyed
last
as possible.
administrator did not.
Yes, the last Governor General, Vasali Silva, he actually was a pragmatic man. He realized that there is no point to it, and he surrendered. He did not follow orders. That is why he was court-martialed, he was stripped off of all his military honors, and it took years for him to be restored to some kind of dignity after that. Because for Salazar, it was a massive loss of face. And the aftermath of Azad Gomantak Dal is also very interesting. So in 1961, when Goa got liberated, in 1962,
19th of December 1961.
But what is more important is, and this is something that again needs to be said, they did not sit and claim that we did all these things, therefore we have a God-given right to rule free Goa. In 1962, they met in the final session of Azad Gomantak Dal and they decided to disband Azad Gomantak Dal.
Our purpose is served.
Our purpose is served. Then some of the people who were politically interested from the outfit, they formed a political party, but that political party was of soldiers from Azad Gomantak Dal, but it was not a part of Azad Gomantak Dal. And there were people like my father who involved themselves in social work after that. He started a school in Goa, he started many other things. There were some people who chose to fight the elections. Mr. Lawande fought election actually.
Yeah.
If he had won, Goa's politics would have gone in a different direction. I wish he had won, but that didn't happen. And then
I think, Shefali, when Goa was finally taken, our defense minister was the one who actually took the big initiative. And America tried every which way to scuttle the whole thing the moment they got the whiff of it. Even Portugal tried to rush its troops, but they could not so quickly to Goa. I believe the Russian envoy and the American ambassador fought a very bitter battle of debate in the United Nations Assembly. These were the same two guys who again locked heads or locked horns when the Cuban Missile Crisis happened. So, this battle over Goa and America trying to justify that what India had done wrong by occupying Goa.
According to them.
According to them, was again supported. India was supported by the
Russia.
Russians.
Yes. India was one of this action of Operation Vijay. Russia was one of the first international forces to actually go out there, stick a limb out, and said what India has done is correct.
So, what happened to the Azad Gomantak Dal? Why don't we have anything glorifying them or some kind of big monuments to them in mainland India? Is Goa not India then? Why aren't we celebrating them in mainland India?
Because not many people know about it. No, you need to first know about it in order to be able to do something about it. This is why this is the purpose of this podcast. Even people in Goa don't know what all Azad Gomantak Dal did. I do because I've done extensive research on it. I do because I was a part of that story and I have heard this first person from Mr. Lawande, from Mr. Narayan, from Nagesh.
There's a very modest exhibition or kind of museum in Goa, I remember.
Yes, in Parwari, yes.
Oh yeah,
yes.
of the Azad Gomantak Dal. But
So,
that is limited over there. It's like, turning them into a small little village force, which they were not.
Yes. So this podcast is the beginning of it. The more people get to know about these unsung heroes of Goa liberation movement, the more is the awareness. Forget Goa is a small part of India. How much awareness we have about Madanlal Dhingra, the common person in Goa? How much awareness do we know about all the revolutionaries? We don't. Only people in those regions know a little bit. Now, of course, after 2014, many of these stories are coming to light. There are books being written, there are movies being made, these stories are being told. But before that, where was the awareness? It was all, Gandhi said did a satyagraha and we attained freedom everywhere.
Yeah, even Goa's liberation has not got any mainland or rather Bollywood big feature. There was some
There were-
kind
there
of
were
very
two
one something in a
movies.
passing,
There were two movies,
Saath Hindustani.
Hindustani and Pukar. Both of them were very badly made and
and
very
they were
bad
all
movies.
commercial and not at
Every
all focused.
movies are commercial.
Yeah.
Even Dhurandhar is commercial. There's nothing wrong in wanting to make money. If you do a good product, that's great. So I don't have a problem
Do
with the movies
justice
being
to the
commercial,
subject.
but do justice to the subject. Anyway, these the movies have at least taken the subject. There are no other movies that have taken the subject.
Yeah.
But this is a subject that needs, filmmakers. It's a great cinematically. It's a great subject. There are these
Absolutely.
young, hot-blooded fighters who had organized a ragtag band, who trained themselves, who became expert marksmen, and who did all these things without any military background. It's such a great story.
Priolkar had written a book about the 4 cases against some fighters.
Priolkar, not to the best of my knowledge.
Somebody had written something about. I have not read it. It's one of my to-do things. So mainland still doesn't write even books about them. Forget
Yeah.
films.
Yeah. Forget mainland. How many books are there in Goa about this? There are books in some in Marathi, some in Konkani. There is a volume by Goa government which basically talks about freedom fighters. There's a digital museum now in Goa which everybody should go and visit. That's in the Aguada Fort, which talks about some of these things. But there is
That
no
fort also
dedicated-
held the fighters as
Yes.
prisoners.
Yes, but there is no dedicated research done. There are sporadic attempts, but there is no dedicated
So sad, no?
book
To
or,
deny 450 plus years of occupation by a foreign force,
nobody is denying it.
by not talking about it, by not celebrating the fighters' liberation.
No, let's not confuse things. Nobody is denying 452 years of occupation, but there is only one part of that Goa liberation movement which has been magnified, and the other streams of equally legitimate fights have been ignored. That is the real story.
So it was not just one day, 19th December
Not even Operation Vijay. I'm
1961.
not even talking about Operation Vijay. I am saying disproportionate importance had been given under the Congress rule to only the satyagrahas at the border of Goa. I am not discounting their contribution, but that was not the only thing that made the Portuguese afraid. In fact, that didn't do anything to the Portuguese themselves. The Portuguese were mortally scared of the Azad Gomantak Dal fighters. That is why many of the Azad Gomantak Dal fighters had cases run against them in absentia. Mohan Ranade was sent to Portugal, where he spent time in Portugal jail, even after Goa got liberated, even after India was free. There were people from Azad Gomantak Dal, like Rajnikant Kenkre, who were killed in a very brutal way. There were people who were caught, they were tortured. These people paid their price in blood. There has been a conspiracy of silence against the contribution of
by denial. I mean, this silence is what I'm.
But they've not been talked about. They have been consistently and deliberately sidelined. Because India and the Congress government wanted to carefully present a facade that only non-violent satyagraha movement and Operation Vijay liberated Goa.
Basically the same fate that Azad Hind Sena met.
Yes, which is not the whole truth.
Yeah. So like Anuj Dhar brought out Azad Hind Sena's a lot of contribution and how they were efforts to scuttle it. I think we'll need some Chud Ghosh and Anuj Dhar kind of people to come out. Now you are one of them. Let us hope more people take up this cause and decide to scratch below the surface and look at the Azad Gomantak Dal fighters, selfless and fearless and really fruitful fight that they put up, which actually eventually helped India regain its rightful part, Goa, into itself. Thank you so much, Shefali. Actually, this talk can go on and on and on, but it's time constraint that makes us stop at this. Otherwise, it's a very intriguing, interesting, a matter of pride kind of tale, and it could just go on. But thank you all the same.
Absolutely, and I'm so glad you did this. May this be the beginning. Just like my talk on Goa Inquisition for Sangam Talks started the floodgates, and now there are a lot more people talking about it.
Before we wind
writing about it. I am hoping that this podcast will also be the beginning of legitimate interest in the Goa liberation movement and of the many ideological streams that made the Goa liberation movement what it is. Let us not draw this conclusion that 2 days of military action and 2 satyagrahas, one in 1954 and 1955, were all it took to liberate Goa from the Portuguese. No, it did not. Azad Gomantak Dal fought from 1955 to 1961. Every single day, they were doing something at great cost to their members and to their fighters. And these are some amazing stories of valor. The names like Vishwanath Lawande, Nagesh Karmali, Narayan Naik, Prabhakar Sinari, Prabhakar Vaidya, Dattaram Desai, Dattaram Uttam Desai, Shabu Desai, they all
Trivikram
need to be
Vaidya.
Prabhakar Trivikram Vaidya, of course. I'm very, very proud. My father was one of the leading lights of Azad Gomantak Dal. Prime Minister Modi himself took his name in the Goa Liberation Movement celebration.
गोवा आंदोलन के लिए अपना सर्वस्व अर्पण किया था। प्रभाकर त्रिविक्रम वैद्य, विश्वनाथ लवांडे, जगन्नाथराव जोशी, नाना काजरेकर, सुधीर फड़के, ऐसे कितने ही सेनानी थे जिन्होंने गोवा, दमन, दीव, दादरा और नगर हवेली की आजादी के लिए संघर्ष किया।
And today,
Prabhakar
whatever
Sinari
I am,
still lives, so that's
yes,
also
he is one of the last of the titans to say.
Yeah.
Nagesh Karmali also passed away only last year. I think.
Prabhakar Sinari, when I met him 2015 or something, was even despite his age, absolutely fabulous memory and could recollect and talk and talk and talk. I just hope he can still do the same.
I'm not sure about
Yeah.
that. I don't even know whether he lives in Goa.
Yeah, but I think this your talk is a good impetus for the young people to take forth this challenge and reclaim this history and unearth all these facts that actually should make all of us proud. And the fighters deserve this. We deserve this as Indians, to know more about our valorous ancestors and recent ancestors. So that's it.
Absolutely. History needs to give these brave sons of Goa the rightful place in the chronicles. And it is our job. No, it's our responsibility. It's our duty as the youth of Goa, as this generation which has shaped Goa, to ensure that justice is done, that their stories are told. I say goodbye to you with this hope that this podcast spurs more people to study this chapter of Goa's history and find these heroes. And maybe there is a best-selling book, there's a best-selling movie.
Yeah,
There is lots of potential here for serious research projects.
True.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody.